Well, let's kick off with discussing what is it that we do as managers when we communicate. Generally speaking, we can cluster our skill sets as workers into three key areas. We can cluster our skill sets into technical skills, into people skills, and into conceptual skills. So they're generally the three clusters of skill sets um, that we do in workplaces. As we start off, when we start off with an organization, we're generally either hired for our technical competence or we're hired with the capacity to build technical competence in the workplace and we're in our role. So we're given a task and we become the owner of that task. We become the specialist of that task and we do that task well and we should be able to deal with contingencies within that task. And that's what we would classify as technical skills. As we progress through the organization, our technical skills become less reliant and our conceptual skills become more important. And conceptual skills are those skills where we can take ideas from multiple locations and multiple sources and apply them to our context. So, this is generally a skill set that is required when you're in senior management. So, as a senior manager, you're not necessarily reliant on your technical skills. You more your greater responsibility in the role is to look around the landscape, see what other organizations are doing, see what the industry is doing, see what your peers and competitors are doing, and take those ideas and apply them into your workplace. And this is the idea of concept, often mixed in with strategy. So when we start off in our role, when we join an organization, there's very little requirement for us to do that. It's mainly internal thinking. We look at policy, we look at procedures, and we apply those policies and procedures in our practice, and we become technically proficient. And that's reliant on our technical skill. At times, we may need to look conceptually, as we're making feedback into what we can do better, or we have conversations with some of our colleagues in other industries or similar industries. We can feed up to management and so forth, but generally speaking, our focus is on those technical skills. As we progress and we're reliant more on those conceptual skills, so as we go through middle management and senior management, and we become more reliant on our conceptual skills, we don't use our technical skills as much because we connect back with the front line to get their advice and seek their input on the technical stuff because they're the ones doing the work day in day out and become the technicians or the technically proficient individuals. And managers get in trouble when they talk about micromanagement are generally about managers who get promoted through the organization but still want to keep on to that technical expertise. So they want to still hold on to the job that they were doing when they first started. And often that's the trap that we fall into with micromanagement. Whereas as you progress through the organization, you're supposed to release that a lot more and give people the freedom to do that. The third skill cluster that I was talking about was people skills. Now, whereas technical and conceptual are important at all levels of the organization, with technical and conceptual, the amount of technical versus conceptual that you use is different depending on where you're in the organization. So when you're on the front line, highly reliant on technical, little reliance on conceptual. When you're on senior management role at the top of the organization, very little reliance on technical, big reliance on conceptual. However, with people skills, doesn't matter where you are in the organization, you have a high reliance on people skills. The importance of that skill set doesn't change dependent on where you are in the organization. So when you're on the front line, you're working within a team, you're communicating up and down and across. You've got a huge reliance on your people skills. When you're in senior management and you're consulting and you're networking and you're leading and you're problem solving, whether you're in middle management or senior management, those skills are just as important as well. This is why people skills are so critical to anybody within the workplace. But they're super critical to leaders and managers because leaders and managers don't work in isolation. There are some roles out there where people can work on the front line in a technical role in a bit of a bubble. And depends on different industries and what you do, but there are cases of that where people can work quite isolated. And even though people skills are important, it's not as reliant. But when we talk about management and leadership, being able to connect to the technical skills of people on the front line, being able to consult, being able to share information, being able to motivate, be able to get people to buy in and commit to what we're doing, all those things are critical to your success as a leader and a manager. And if you're not very good or you have an opportunity to improve significantly in your people skills, then you're going to struggle whilst you're trying to do those things. Particularly when we go back to this idea of leadership being about compelling people to act, not forcing them through fear of authority, but people look at you and go, "That's where I want to go. I want to go where Tony's leading us. I believe in what Tony's saying. I believe in his judgment, and I want to follow that direction." And that requires us to have very strong people skills. The idea of being able to connect, support, motivate, lead. And a big part of those people skills are our communication skills because that's at the core of our people skills. It's at our ability to be able to share information, gather information, be able to translate an idea into our head and put it into somebody else's head is all through our communication skills, our ability to articulate an idea, our ability to ask the right questions, our ability to connect through listening, demonstrating empathy. All those type of things are at the core of our people skills, and they all cluster under our communication skills. So it's not surprising that the studies show that managers can spend as much as 80% of their time in the day working on those communication skills, doing things such as sharing information or asking questions and listening or being able to sell an idea or promote that idea or just setting our example of what we want through our actions. And the better that we are at communicating, the more connected we are going to be with our teams and our broader stakeholders because they're going to know what we're trying to do and we're going to know how they feel and where they're coming with that. And of course, there are multiple ways that we can communicate. Especially as managers, we communicate verbally. We do a lot of that, talking, discussing, having one-on-one meetings with people, stand-up meetings, walk around the floor, talk to people, ask them what's going on. Some of that might be a little bit in terms of, how was your weekend? But a lot of it is around, tell me about your work, what's going on, what are some of the challenges, what can I do to help? We do a lot of that verbal communication, be it face-to-face or via video conferencing or via telephone. We also communicate in written form, our ability to write down in written form our ideas and the information that we're trying to share or the information that we're trying to gather. And we do that through emails, through letters, through notifications, text messages. More formally, we can do it via reporting. We can do it in mass through things such as social media or newsletters or posters. And then the other one, of course, is through presentations. And the more senior that we become within the organization, the more we do of these, the more reliant this is as a communication tool. And a presentation might be one-on-one, where we present a proposal to somebody. It might be a more senior manager, or it might be a key shareholder or stakeholder or investor. We have an idea. We want to promote that idea. We want to sell that idea, and we might do a one-on-one presentation. We might do team meetings where we're going to do some type of sharing of an idea or a skill set or a training session, something like that as a group presentation. And of course, we also do presentations in some cases more formal through media. So, we may be asked to do a media presentation in terms of something that our business is doing, or perhaps even respond to news reports in some cases. So, the scale of communication can be quite informal to formal, and the medium can be quite different. And particularly important in terms of communicating as a manager, two particular areas I just want to focus on a little bit. One is making sure that we communicate within our scope of authority or delegation or mandate. This idea that we shouldn't be representing any views or ideas that aren't within our scope of responsibility. One of the key things about taking on a management role is when you accept a management role, you, by default, your loyalties shift to the organization. And again, it depends on whether you have a unilateral view of industrial relations or a more pluralist view of industrial relations. These things can play in the nuance, but generally speaking, when you're in the front line as a frontline employee, you generally considered to your loyalties, even though they should lie with the organization, really lie with yourself as a worker. When you're offered a management position and you accept that management position, the organization says to you, we want you to represent us as an organization, as a manager, a representative of the brains trust of the organization, if you like. And when you accept that, the organization generally assumes that your loyalties don't lie with workers as such, lie with the organization. And that can be tricky for some, depending on the culture of the organization, depending on what you do. Some organizations are more of a view that we're all one, regardless of whether you're a worker or management. But other organizations, particularly bureaucratic organizations, the culture is more divided. And when you jump into a management role, one of the things that you do is often one of the things that you have to tangle with and deal with is often that view from the team, particularly if you get promoted from within. Let's say, oh, now you represent management, and particularly as a frontline manager, you've got one foot still with your team and one foot with the organization, and managing those dynamics can often be tricky. The more senior you go through the organization, the more removed from the frontline that you are, the easier it becomes. But one of the things that, and just going back to this point, one of the things that is important around management communication is that when you're communicating, particularly as a manager, you have to be really clear around what's within your scope of responsibility or accountability to be able to communicate on. And the classic example of that is, your business, for whatever reason, is in the news and you've got a reporter and they stick the microphone in your face and they say, we're looking for some comment regarding this. If you're not within that scope of authority to be able to do that, then you have no right to comment on that. You're not the best representative, and you should be deferring that response to someone who has the authority to do that. Now, that's an extreme example, and many of us aren't going to be in that position. But the concept is the same, that a worker comes to you or one of your team members comes to you and wants to know a position about the business on something. If we don't have the scope or the authority to discuss that, because it's not within our position description or accountability or within the organization's reporting lines on these matters, well then we really have to defer our response to those individuals. And that's the first thing, is understanding that when we're communicating information, it must be within our scope. And that scope is determined by things such as our knowledge, our skills, and the authority of our role and our position. And often, such things as, company performance or company position or issues that are going on, such as perhaps um, legal action that's going on, or talks with other organizations or suppliers, especially if you're working in a public company, a company that's listed on the stock exchange, or if you're working for a government organization, where these things are really clearly um, set out. So that's the first thing, is making sure that we're working within our scope, and we're communicating within our scope. And our scope will be um, it, whether we're able to comment or communicate on a particular matter will be dependent on things such as our role title, our description, our scope, as I said, where we sit within the organization, our competency around our skills and knowledge, um, or whether management have given us the authority. Sometimes, Tony, I want you to take um, a lead on this, and you share this information with the team, or let them know. The other thing is about dealing with the sensitive information. As managers, we're exposed to a lot more information than we would normally do if we were just a frontline worker. And with that comes responsibility and, again, accountability. So just making sure that we're consciously aware of confidentiality and sensitivity with information that we have, that we get exposed to. So we need to be aware that not all information can be shared, and that some information needs to be dealt with in a sensitive and a protected manner. If you're working within the public service, there's a really strict and clear guidelines around protection markings, things like that really allow to control what information is allowed to be shared and what's not. In most cases, for many organizations, knowing whether something is confidential or not is determined by your policies and procedures. And as I talked about, public service has security markings or protection markings, or policies and procedures around what information can be shared, how it can be shared, and so forth. Sometimes your organization's code of conduct or ethics can determine that. Sometimes referring to other teams, such as your HR team or your legal team, can help you determine whether something is confidential or not. Referring it up to your senior manager when you're unsure, or just looking for any precedents that may have been set on these matters. And just some examples of what are we talking about when we talk about potential confidential or sensitive information? Well, you've got commercial in confidence, stuff that doesn't give away your special source secrets, information about what the organization's doing and financial position or situation, things like cash flow, things such as companies' financial viability. That type of information is generally considered sensitive and private. Personal disclosures from clients and customers. So any personal information is really covered under the Privacy Act of '88, and that. Whereas when we talk about commercial in confidence and we talk about information about operations, that stuff is mainly organizational policies. When we talk about disclosing client or workers or any personal information, you're talking about law. So that stuff is captured under the Privacy Act, and that's very clear about what we're not allowed to share, and that's a lot. We're not allowed to share, we're not allowed to capture and share people's personal information unless it's absolutely necessary for our operations. So we can only capture personal information if it's absolutely necessary for what we do as a business, and we can only share it if it's absolutely necessary for what we do as a business, and we've got the client's permission, and it's only within the borders, and so forth. Commercial information about suppliers, clients, and customers, that stuff is generally considered confidential. If you're going to senior manager meetings or management meetings in general, some of that content that's discussed will be considered confidential and sensitive. And then we've got stuff such as personal conversations of personal matters with employees or colleagues, things like performance evaluation results. And of course, I talked about the difference between um, confidential because it's company policy, and confidential because and private because it's legislative requirement.